Calibrating cybernetics.
Talk to him now.
AT, Andre.
Come on, Dre.
Yep. Tripping with Let's Go. Woo! Tripping with Theo Bold.
What's your name?
Theo so bold.
Yeah.
Driggity. Let's go. Tripping with Theo Bold. Tripping.
What are we doing?
Tripping with Theo Bold.
Come on, Dre.
Yo, hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the 156th episode of Tripping with Theo Bold. I'm your host, Andre Theo Bold. Welcome to the show. Glad you guys could tune in. Welcome. So, as you guys know, whenever there's a 6 or an 8 in the episode number, got to pay homage to the women of the 6888. So, today's episode is 156. So now, of course, if it's a 160 or 180 or 280 or 260, we're not going to cover like 10 straight episodes of that. But, you know, we here, episode 156. So before I go any further, make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and tell a friend to tell a friend. Do all that fun internet stuff like the old people say. So now we are moseying along in the book by Charity Adams entitled One Woman's Army. And we are on the 7th chapter, which is entitled the 22nd of May through the 31st of December, 1943. So in this chapter, basically what happens is Charity had to hand over command of Company 8. So in chapter 6, basically talks about how, you know, she got assigned to Company 8 and how, you know, how she built it up, and, you know, they had camaraderie, they had all these different stories. And she had to give it up, you know, like Company 8 was her baby. You know, like we all have things or jobs that we have to give up. Like I remember like one of my jobs, I worked at Hoyt Cinemas 12. Man, shout out to Hoyt Cinemas 12. You know, first job in high school, and it was a fun job. It was probably like my favorite job. There was a lot of stuff to do. They always kept us busy, you know, and I felt like, you know, I belong. I remember when I first started at Hoyt Cinemas 12, it seemed like this big thing. It was a big deal, you know. It seemed like I remember walking in for the first, because I used to go to the movies there with my mom. And the fact that I was going there to try to find a job and to work, it was like the place just seemed bigger, you know. And as time went on and I had different roles within the company or whatever, you know, I got attached to it, you know. And I remember when I was getting ready to go to college, that's when I gave it up, you know. Because I had to move on to I had to move on to better things, you know. I think I worked a little bit there when I was in college or whatever. And then when I was at, you know, when I worked at Rockwell Collins, when I worked in Iowa, I remember I grew into my role, and I mattered, you know, like I had things that I worked on, you know, and I had things that only I could do, you know. And when it was time to move on, it was hard. So this was kind of the same situation with Major Adams. I think a better analogy or a better situation would be when I was in band. When I was in high school band, you guys didn't know, I was in a pops band, you know, played clarinet, first chair. You know, when I got tired of playing the high notes, I moved on to bass clarinet, you know. But my first year in band, we had a band director. His name was Nat Dickey, you know, and he was like the dopest band director, man, because I went to a Christian academy and we played, I forget there's secular and then there's non-secular music. I went to a Christian academy, so I forget which one is which, but basically our school wanted us to play Christian songs, and we were playing pops songs because we were a pops band, so we played like modern music, or as the Christians say, we played worldly music, and we were jamming. And then I remember, when I first started in the band and how I didn't have a role or anything. I didn't even know what instrument I wanted to play. I wanted to play trumpet and saxophone or drums. But we had like 20 saxophones and like 20 trumpets, and we had like 4 drummers, so they were like, nah, we need you to pick up clarinet. So I picked up clarinet, and we had fun, man. And I remember we went on a tour it was called the Northeastern. It was a fancy name. It was like the Northeastern tour, something like that, where we went to Boston, we went to New York, went to Philly. And I remember on our final leg of the tour on the way home, our band director, Nat Dickey, made an announcement on the bus. And he was like, hey, due to certain circumstances, I'm not going to be your band director next year, but Dave Workman is going to step in my place and, become the band director. Because Nat Dickey had his own like, brass quintet band. But I think really just the school didn't like the music he was letting us play. So when he told us that news on the bus, man, I was crushed, man. Like, I started crying, like that was like probably like one of the times when I was like, yo, man, you can't go. Like, man, we just started. Like, so that hurt. So this is kind of the same situation with like Charity Adams, right? With Company 8. She built up it was her baby. It was her, like, they went through a lot of trials and tribulations. And she got promoted, so she had to move on to greener pastures. And when she moved up in rank, well, she got promoted to major in this section of the book. She got promoted to major, and her job was basically training the auxiliaries. So in this role, she basically did things like she wrote the plans and training. When she was in the plans and training group, and when she was in this group, she wrote courses and the training materials for the WAC officer candidates in the overseas, or for the overseas theater of operation. So it's kind of interesting that she wrote that before she even knew that she was even going overseas, So in this chapter, she basically explains like there's like a lot of like mundane tasks. She had like a lot of different various like mundane assignments. She one thing that stuck out when I read this was for the motor transport school, there were few blacks in this school that she had to kind of oversee and like monitor. And this is what blacks mainly did during like this time period, and also in the war. Like, they basically were transporting things and setting things up for the battles to take place, and then of course you had like, other special regiments that, would, like you had the tank battalion that went and they drove, or they actually were in tanks, handling business, but while she was in this role, she basically was responsible for improving processes, So when I heard this, the first thing I thought about was lean electronics. When I was in Rockwell, they made us take lean training. And lean training, if you guys don't know, basically is it was the foundation, or it was a cornerstone of the practices of Toyota, right? Like with lean, there's no waste, right? So we had to do, I remember when we did our lean training, we had to like do like a class, and it was a pretty dope class, man. It was something that to me they should teach lean in like schools. Like it should be a class that everyone takes because it's very beneficial. When I took lean when I was at Rockwell, they basically had us like there was like 100 of us that went into this big, huge conference hall, and they broke us into teams of 5, 20 apiece, and they gave us an assignment, and we had to like just go attack it, So we all were trying to accomplish this task that they gave us, and we were there for an hour doing this task, and it took us we used the full hour. We used the full hour, and none of us got more than like 15% done with the task. Then they had like a seminar or whatever that broke down the different roles and what roles are repetitive, what roles are independent, what roles are dependent, and then we organized ourselves accordingly to like the type of role that we had. And then we were given the same task, and we got it done in like 5 minutes. So to me, that was like pretty impressive. It was amazing. I'm like, oh, wow. We didn't realize that. It was almost like magic, So when I heard about her having to improve processes and just kind of monitor like what people are doing, are people doing duplicate things, that made me think of my lean electronics training, And then also when she got promoted, she was responsible for like kind of like boosting the morale. Like people were kind of like humdrumming around, and she had to show people the importance of what they were doing, So all this to me kind of is the foundation of, or I wouldn't say that it's the start of the foundation of why the 6888 women were successful when it came to resolving the male backlog issue, So one interesting tidbit in this chapter that I didn't know, and this is where my grandma, now I see why my grandma said what she said, but basically, in this chapter or around this time period, the WACs became the WAC, right? So so basically they went from the WACs, right? So it was the WAAC, which is the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, to just the WAC, which is the Women's Army Corps. So you pronounce the acronym the same way, but one has 2 A's in it, one has 1 A. When my grandma was alive, one thing she always specified was when she said WAC or when they said Women's Army Corps, she always lets them know, no, I joined when it was the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Like, so she makes that known that when she joined when it was the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. And that's important because the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was not part of the Army, which is, I didn't know that. They weren't part of the Army. But when they became the Women's Army Corps, they were now part of the Army, which made them eligible for GI insurance, so that's definitely something that I didn't know. And then further down the line, fast forward down the line more, the Women's Army Corps got absorbed into the Army, and then just became the Army, So in this chapter, the government wanted, they wanted to further specify the Women's Army Corps to the Negro WAC, or the Negro Women's Army Corps. And Major Adams stood on business. She stood on, like, this was probably like her first. I mean, I'm not gonna say she was defiant in this case, but she stood for what was right, so basically they wanted to make her, in charge of the Negro Women's Army Corps. And then she basically was like, well, nah, it's just the Women's Army Corps. Like there is like I don't want to do that distinction. Like I mean, they still like segregated the blacks and the whites, but she didn't want it to be further cemented. So this was her base. This was like one of the first times I think she was willing to disobey a direct order because she was like, nah, this don't make sense. You know, so when she stood her ground, she learned where a lot of her white colleagues stood. A lot of her white colleagues didn't come to her defense. They didn't speak up for her. They just got quiet. You know, so I think that was a very I think that was a pivoting moment in her career because she knew, oh, these people kind of got on code and they didn't say nothing. You know, they didn't come to her defense. Cause I think there was a period where, you know, just by how she reflects on it, I could tell that, you know, there were periods or there were times when, you know, she forgot that the country was in the state that it was in. Like she forgot, you know, that there is segregation, you know, and the fact that they tried to further push that needle, you know, she thought, hey, I made allies. And since I made allies, you know, they're all going to come to my defense. And no, they didn't come to her defense, you know? So that never became a thing, right? Or it never officially became named the Negro Women's Army Corps. Just the Women's Army Corps was a split. I mean, it was segregated, but it wasn't officially called that. So one question I have in this book, or something that I was thinking about while I was reading this chapter, was what was the real reason behind the promotion? What was the real reason? Like, yeah, she was doing a good, like she was definitely exceeding expectation all over the place. But it was like, why promote her to major to have her appear to do less? I mean, I'm not gonna say she did less, but it was like, I'm just gonna spit it out because I'm up here meandering. When I first heard about or read about her promotion in this chapter, the first thing I thought about was, I'm like, okay, she's forming too much of a camaraderie with her people that look like her, and they're growing in numbers as they come. So how much influence could she have overall if that were the case? You know, now this is just me tripping right now, right? This is me thinking outside the box. That's how I think. It's like, why promote someone into a role to where they're going to take on a group where they don't have the full support of the peers that are non-black, you know? So to me, that was just something that I thought was interesting, you know? Like, this kind of reminded me of, you know, it's kind of like in engineering, what happens is when you start working as an engineer, you work on cool stuff. And if you do too good of a job doing the fun stuff or the cool stuff, the technical stuff, what happens is they throw you right into management. Right. And a lot of people don't like going into, like me, I'm not a manager. Like I'll quit before I become a manager. That's a whole different episode, man. But yeah, I'm not cut from that cloth. You know? But it's kind of the similar thing. It's like she was doing such a good job with the hands-on stuff, they threw her into more of like or they promoted her to like more of like a managerial role, you know? So, but I like to me, the thing is, everything around this is weird. Like, it's interesting to read her recollection of her time that she served in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the Women's Army Corps, and the 6 888, you know, It's very interesting. But it's very interesting, like hearing her perspective. But it's like I almost want to hear. I almost feel like there was a bigger plan, right? I feel like we're getting the reaction to her, or we're getting her reaction of being in the system, but it's like who was I want to know who. Well, we know who was orchestrating it, but what was the rationale behind how they were arranging things and organizing the people, That's what to me is fascinating, Like anytime I go to a job, like I'm always, of course you got to focus on your task and your job so you can get your check so you can go home, right? But I'm always interested in the organizational structure. I'm always interested in, why things are structured the way they're structured. Like what are they really after? What are they really trying to prevent? That's how my mind works, And I'm not going to get the answers from this book, I don't think, because it's from one person's point of view. But I think we have to pay attention to what's not said. Like that's what I have to focus on, But now, what are your thoughts? I'm just thinking out loud here, But yeah, that covers this chapter. Learn something new about my grandma. I knew that she always specified that she was in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and she even corrected people, right? Like when she said when she joined the Women's Army Corps, my grandma said, "No, I joined the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps," and she made it known to put that extra A in there, and I didn't know why, but now I do, right? Because she basically joined before they were even in the Army. Right, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was not part of the Army. They didn't become part of the Army until they became the Women's Army Corps. Right, so that was something that I found interesting. Anywho, that concludes today's episode of Tripping with Theo Bold. Like I said, we're gonna come back in episode 158 and then 160 with some more information and knowledge from One Woman's Army. And with all that being said, I'm out of here, folks. Peace. Yep. Tripping with Theo Bold.
Let's go.
Caliente.
Tripping. Yep. Tripping. Tripping. Tripping with Theo Bold.
Tripping with Theo Bold.